Greetings and welcome to Cybersecurity Today. I'm your host, Jim Wiggins. If this is your first time tuning into our program, allow me a few moments to introduce what we're all about. So what exactly is Cybersecurity Today? Well, it's a show engineered to explore the realm of computer security in a stimulating and insightful way. Cybersecurity Today is a half-hour broadcast utilizing a talk show or newscast format to dissect the themes, issues, and contemporary events in the cybersecurity arena. Our mission with this program is to dispel the murkiness and complexity often associated with the cybersecurity field. For our viewers who are already active professionals in the sector, this show will deliver a pulse on the current state of affairs. We feature a variety of esteemed guests to delve into topics that hold significant relevance to the cybersecurity landscape. Our objective is to offer information to a diverse audience, from beginners to industry veterans, and everyone in between. You're sure to gain fresh insight into cybersecurity with our show. All right, so let's set the stage and discuss the structure of the show. This will help you understand what's in store. Today's show is divided into two parts. Our first segment, known as Cyber Bites, encapsulates several current events unfolding today in the cybersecurity sector. Some of these developments might be familiar, while others may be entirely new to you. Moving into our second segment, we're honored to welcome Mr. Rick Howard, the pioneering cybersecurity strategist and acclaimed thought leader behind the concept of Cybersecurity First Principles. In today's discussion, Mr. Howard will delve into this transformative topic, challenging conventional cybersecurity dogmas and introducing foundational principles that focus on reducing the probability of material impact. With extensive expertise in strategic planning, zero trust frameworks, and innovative risk management, he has been at the forefront of reshaping how organizations defend against evolving cyber threats. Whether you're looking to rethink your security strategy or seeking cutting-edge insights into proactive threat mitigation, this session promises to be both enlightening and impactful. We're excited for you to join us as we explore the evolving challenges and innovative solutions that are redefining the future of cybersecurity. Okay, so let's get into Cyber Bites and talk about what's going on in the cybersecurity industry. Federal authorities are scaling back key election security efforts, raising alarms about potential vulnerabilities. Critics warn that dismantling specialized cybersecurity teams could leave U.S. elections exposed to foreign meddling. Lawmakers are urging a reassessment of these measures to safeguard the integrity of the democratic process. Those are some of the more prominent headlines currently shaping the cybersecurity industry. We're going to take a quick break, but stay tuned. When we return, we'll be joined by Mr. Rick Howard, the pioneering cybersecurity strategist and acclaimed thought leader behind the book, Rebooting Cybersecurity, a First Principles approach to explore revolutionary strategies and best practices for redefining your cybersecurity posture. We'll see you back here in just a few minutes.
When you're finished with your food or beverage cartons, toss it in the recycling bin. Because every carton is recyclable and can be turned into useful paper products. When the contents are gone, let the carton live on. Recycle your cartons.
Welcome back to Cybersecurity Today. Next, we're honored to host Mr. Rick Howard, a visionary in Cybersecurity First Principles. Rick challenges conventional dogmas by advocating for a foundational outcome-based approach that goes beyond the traditional CIA triad. His expertise spans zero trust implementations, intrusion kill chain prevention, resilience building, risk forecasting, and the integration of automation, all critical elements for reducing the probability of material impact over time. With a distinguished career that includes leadership roles in cybersecurity strategy, threat intelligence, and workforce development, Rick has guided organizations ranging from government agencies to Fortune 500 companies in transforming their incident response and risk mitigation strategy. Today, he'll share his insights on applying first principle thinking to reimagining cybersecurity, offering a roadmap for both seasoned professionals and those new to the field. Rick, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm not sure about that visionary crack, but I'll go with it, all right?
Well, I got to tell you, everybody, I actually picked up a copy of your book, and so I would definitely say the term visionary is applicable here.
Well, thank you, sir.
So, I thought maybe what we could do is, your book, of course, challenges some of the traditional cybersecurity dogmas. And I was wondering if we could start off having you explain what the first principle thinking means in the context of cybersecurity and why you believe it's the missing foundation in our current approach.
Yeah, I started thinking about this idea about 10 years ago. I watched an old NPR program about two British mathematicians, one famous one, Bertrand Russell, where they realized that back in the 1900s, mathematicians could come up with two different answers, completely correct answers, but different answers to the same problem. So they decided to rewrite the rules of math from the ground up using a set of first principles, and it took them 80 pages to prove that 1 + 1 = 2. And in a famous footnote, Russell says this might prove useful in the future. And back then we all thought math nerds weren't very funny, so shame on us, right?
Sure.
So I said, well, if that's true for math, what could it be for cybersecurity? What's the absolute cybersecurity first principle that we should all agree on? That's what started me on this journey.
Understood. I know the book also talks about an atomic cybersecurity first principle, focusing on the idea of reducing the probability of material impact over a bounded time.
Yeah.
How did this principle come about, and how does it distinguish it from traditional best practices and traditional approaches with that CIA triad that we've all learned about way back when?
Well, scientists have learned about or used first principle thinking to solve all kinds of complex problems. Like Euclid did it, Descartes did it, and if you want to bring it into the modern day, Elon Musk even does it when he builds his space companies. And the idea here is that there should be an absolute first principle that drives everything else in the problem domain. So when I started thinking about it, you mentioned what I came up with, and it is for everybody in the InfoSec profession, what we should all be doing for our programs is reducing the probability of material impact due to a cyber event in the next, say, 3 to 5 years. And that sounds really simple when you say it fast. It almost sounds like a Twitter line, but there's 3 pieces to it. One is we have to reduce the probability. That implies that we have to be able to calculate what the current probability is so we can do that forecast, which, by the way, our whole industry is not very good at. So that's one. The second one is of material impact, meaning we're going to protect material assets for the company because, let's face it, not everything in our networks are important to the company, just very specific things. So reduce the probability of material impact. And the third one is we're going to time bound it, because there's some point in the future, say 100 years, will your company get hacked? Absolutely. But what's the probability that we'll be hacked in, say, the next 3 years? That kind of calculation we can do.
Understood. I know that in our world, a lot of times checklists become kind of the mantra or the focus for organizations. How does this idea of a first principle strategy potentially change that mindset from that checklist of best practices to something that is really more fundamental and outcome based? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. That's checklists are not strategies. Okay, they're just things to do. And when I've gone around talking to my peers in the InfoSec profession, I've realized that most of us don't really understand the difference between strategies and tactics. And just to be simple about it, strategies are the what we want to do. What are we trying to accomplish? And then the tactics underneath it are how we're going to do that. Now, those checklists that you're talking about, you mentioned the CIA triad. We could talk about the NIST cybersecurity framework. Those are all great ideas, but they're just things, okay? Even if you get them all done, you go to your boss and say, hey, boss, I did the complete checklist. What do you tell the boss that you did with all that? What were you accomplishing? So we should come to the conclusion of what strategies are we pursuing for our InfoSec profession, and then decide what tactics to deploy to reduce the material impact probability.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Hey, in your book, I also wanted to ask you a question about something. You talk about some supporting strategies: zero trust, intrusion kill chain, prevention resilience, risk forecasting, even automation. I kind of introduced those as part of the segue, as we opened up today's show. How do these strategies interlock or try to support these overarching first principle constructs?
Yeah, I guess the first thing I want to say is you don't have to do all of those. All right. All I'm saying is if you agree with me about what the absolute cybersecurity first principle is, there are some supporting strategies that we might pursue to help us reduce that probability. And so you mentioned a couple of them, right? One is zero trust, which, by the way, is sort of a passive strategy, meaning that we are going to reduce the attack surface to our people, devices, and software to absolutely need to know information. All right. So the idea is to button it all down as much as possible and not leave any, let's say, open doors and open windows so that bad guys can sneak through them. That's one strategy, kind of passive, a general purpose strategy. A second one is a more active one, intrusion kill chain prevention, meaning we design prevention controls for our networks designed specifically for known adversary campaigns. You can see the difference. One is the zero trust is kind of passive. It's a strategy to block everybody. Intrusion kill chain prevention is a strategy to go after specifically all the known adversary campaigns that are out there. And I may ask you this, how many do you think are out there on any given day? How many hackers are running adversary campaigns on, let's say, whatever day this is, Tuesday or whatever?
Probably tens of thousands, I would assume, or at least thousands, I would assume, right?
That's what most people think, but in truth, it's not really that case. If you look at a very famous wiki called the MITRE ATT&CK Framework, they're tracking about 150 nation-state organizations.
Okay.
That's it, 150. Now, that doesn't include cybercrime, but if you go to the FBI or if you look at what Microsoft talks about in their blogs, they're tracking another 100 so cybercrime outfits on any given day. So the total is just 250. So if you could put prevention controls in place for all those known adversary campaigns, you could be better protected than if you didn't.
That's interesting because I think about the Norse attack map. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's like supposed to be a real time, and it looks like the world's coming to an end when you actually look at that website or when you look at that attack map. But
the very famous pew pew diagram. Okay, yeah, of course.
So, but you're telling me that pretty much all that activity is coming from about 250 known kind of threat vectors or threat sources, huh?
Yeah, I mean, if you understand what I'm talking about, adversaries, they have to string a bunch of actions together to be successful across the intrusion kill chain. Those sequence of actions I call adversary playbooks, and when they launch them at victims, that's an adversary campaign. So about 250 of those running on the internet on any given day.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Hey, in your book, you also talk about zero trust as being both a philosophy and a tactical framework. Can you talk for a moment about its role as a first principle strategy and what challenges organizations face when they transition to a zero trust mindset?
Yeah, zero trust is an idea, okay, that we're going to limit access to all of our material assets in our network to the people that absolutely need to have them and nobody else. And this idea has been around since about 2010. John Kindervag wrote the original white paper back then, describing this new idea, because before we had zero trust, most of us our big strategy was perimeter defense. We would draw this big electronic barrier around our network access, our assets, and try not to let the bad guys through the entry point. That was our big strategy. So John writes his white paper and says, that's really dumb, because if you get past the barrier, once you're inside the bubble, you have access to everything, right? And so the big poster child for this kind of activity is Edward Snowden. It doesn't really matter if you think he's a hero or a traitor. What happened, though, he was on the inside of the barrier and had access to lots of classified information. He collected it all up with a $100 web crawler and walked out the front door with it, right? So because he had access to everything inside the bubble. So Kindervag's big idea is that we should not do it with a perimeter, we should actually consider people, devices, and software components and limit access to all those things to the only things they need access to get their work done.
That makes a lot of sense. Moving on ahead, I wanted to ask about kill chain, the intrusion kill chain, and what are the key stages that organizations need to focus on, and how does this strategy actively flip the offensive-defensive balance? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the big flip was, before intrusion kill chain came along, what people like me used to say in public was that the bad guys only had to be successful once, wherein the good guys had to be successful all the time. What that means is, like, the bad guy could write a new piece of malware and have it work, and that works for them. But we, the good guys, would have to prevent all the possible malware coming into the organization. That's how we used to think about the problem. But again, in 2010, the Lockheed Martin researchers who wrote the original white paper said that's the wrong way to think about it. Like I said, bad guys have to string a series of actions together across the intrusion kill chain. They have to get every single action together. And if you look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework, those sequences can be as many as 30 to 500, depending on how complex the campaign is. The bad guy has to make that right every single time. Every one of those steps has to be right. The good guy only has to get it right once. If we can break that chain someplace in that sequence, we defeat the adversary, right? So it completely flipped the idea of how we can do network defense.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Let's move on into implementation. Talk a little bit about that. I know that organizations sometimes struggle with translating high-level principles into actionable steps. What kind of practical measures can they take to implement this first principle approach concept without overextending resources? Thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a couple points there, right? One is, like in my entire career, people like me would be enamored with the technical solutions, because there's always some cool tool that you can deploy and it claims to do all kinds of things and that are really important to you. Okay, but what we forget most of the time is also to bring along the people and process to manage all those things, right? So that's the first thing to think about. It's not just technology, but you have to have people and process to get all of that done. And I think that's where many people fail in any of these strategies that we've talked about before.
So in your book, you talk a little bit about risk forecasting, and I know that it's kind of a newer concept within the cyber world. How do you recommend or suggest organizations balance the need for precise measurement with the reality of good enough, right? I mean, so that's an interesting challenge there.
Yeah, and like I said, the industry doesn't do this very well. For my entire career, I've gotten away with bringing heat maps up to the board and senior leadership, and you all know what a heat map is. It's on the x-axis is all the things that can go wrong, and on the y-axis is how bad it's going to go wrong if it does go wrong. So all the really nasty stuff floats high and to the right, and the more benign stuff goes low and to the left. And if you're, decent with a spreadsheet, you can color code that. So the bad stuff is red, the sort of bad stuff is yellow, and the benign stuff is green. That's the colors of a heat map. And it turns out that there are reams of evidence that shows that that's a really bad way to convey risk to cybersecurity leadership, right? So what we should be doing is thinking in terms of probabilities, okay? What is the probability that something bad is going to happen to us? And here's the big epiphany I've had in the last 5 years. You'd mentioned probability, and most of us took our probability and stats 101 course in college. We think that in order to calculate probabilities, you have to have really precise numbers, 5 nines numbers, or it's not going to be any good. And that's not true at all. What you need when you're probability forecasting is good enough estimates so that leadership can make an estimate. You have to be in the right ballpark to make those decisions. And let me just give you a quick story. This is about 3 or 4 years ago. I went to my CEO and said, "Hey boss, the probability of material impact for our little startup is like 20%. And what I really want to do is spend the next year collecting all the things, counting all the data, putting a lot of work on our entire staff and getting us a really precise number." And he asked me this question. He said, "Hey Rick, when you get done doing all that and you spend all that money and resources to get a more precise number, what do you think the difference is going to be from this first number you gave me and the more precise number?" And I had to admit it was going to be, a couple of points off. And he looked at me and he said, I can make a decision what you gave me today with this number. I don't need to spend a year doing that. And I was like, of course.
Yeah.
That's how we should be thinking about it. We need ballpark numbers to make decisions with.
Makes sense, makes sense. I know another theme or topic that we alluded to in the intro was resilience. And resilience, of course, is a lot about business continuity, even though an organization might face data breaches. Can you share some tactical or examples from the book that illustrates how organizations can build resilience into their cybersecurity programs?
Yeah, and I think here I am at the end of my career, and I've spent lots of money in various organizations trying to do preventative work by pursuing zero trust, let's say, or intrusion kill chain prevention. Those strategies tried to prevent the bad guys from being successful. But resiliency is not that at all. Resiliency is not trying to prevent anything. It's trying to make your organization survive it. And here I am, I've been doing this 30 years. I think that for most of us, working in organizations that are startups up to mid-level, mid-sized companies, resilience is probably the strategy that you're going to want to pursue because it's the cheapest and easiest to do. And by the way, the tactics that you deploy for resilience are completely different from what you would do for zero trust or intrusion kill chain prevention. The tactics for resilience are things like backups and restores and crisis management. Those are the things that are going to allow you to withstand some really massive cyber attack, right, and not try to prevent it in the first place.
Understood, understood. I think the fifth topic that I introduced was the idea of automation. And I know that's in the book and you talk about that. Of course, today we think of automation as being highlighted as the linchpin of modern security practices. What role do you think automation plays in enabling a first principle approach, and how should organizations integrate it with traditional cyber processes?
Well, just to give you an example of how good it could be for you, when the Google leadership started Google back in the early 2000s, right, when it was just a search company, the company leadership made a decision to hand the network management functions over to the automation team and not to the traditional network management team that everybody else on the planet used. And so you know what happens when you hand that kind of problem to a bunch of automators? They automate everything.
Exactly.
Right? And so Google invented DevOps, 6 years before we had a name for DevOps, right? And what that means is we can get rid of all the toil, meaning the really dumb stuff that you can fat finger and you have to do it over and over again. You can just automate it away and give us a set of consistency across the network. And I thought that the InfoSec profession was going to totally embrace the idea of this DevOps kind of thing where automate all the tasks. And we haven't done it, right? We use helper tools to automate tasks, but we don't really get into the automation system. I think it's one of the biggest shortfalls that we have in the InfoSec profession. Security professionals like us need to really wrap our heads around and hands around this whole idea of automation and DevOps or DevSecOps.
Understood. So let's throw a little bit of controversy into the dialogue. You
Okay.
argue that many established frameworks and control sets only provide snapshots of security. How can a first principle approach overcome the limitations of these static models in an ever-evolving threat landscape? Any thoughts?
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I don't want to throw all those frameworks under the bus. A lot of smart people wrote them up, and every one of them has great things in them. The question is when you go to your boss and say, hey, and the boss says, what are you trying to do with your InfoSec program? Do you answer with, oh, I'm going to use the NIST cybersecurity framework? Is that what you're trying to do for your program? How does that relate to the business? How does that relate to what you're trying to do for your leadership team? Okay, so what I'm saying is you're probably going to have elements of a lot of different frameworks in your organization. They're just not the first principle you're trying to pursue. They might be one of the tactics you have to pursue, right? But and maybe not, right? Depending on what size of the organization you are, right? So I'm a fan of those things because they make you think about what could be done. But I need to be able to couch it in terms of what am I trying to do with my InfoSec program. And by the way, I want to come back to this. When we say it's an atomic first principle, That means that everybody in the field needs to agree that this is what it is. It can't be different for what vertical you're in, and it can't be different for the size of the organization you're in. We should all be trying to accomplish the same thing at the very atomic level. What might change later are the tactics and strategies we choose based on the vertical we're in or the size we are, right? So frameworks are going to work to some of those, but not all the way across the board.
Understood. You know, you talked about being in the industry for 30 years, and let's move to like the mentorship side of this part of the equation. If you were to advise a young security practitioner or a team just beginning their cybersecurity journey, you know, way back when, 30 years ago, or today, right? What first principle-based mindset should they adopt to further future-proof their approach? Any ideas?
Yeah, I get this question a lot as I go around speaking at various organizations. I always have some advice for the newbies when they ask me that question, right? And because they're all concerned about have they taken the right courses in college? Do they have the right certifications? I will tell you the thing that is the most valuable tool to have on your tool belt. And here it is. You need to be able to explain really complex things to smart people who don't really understand your domain, all right, in a way that they can make decisions with, all right? And so what I mean by that is, we know we're in a very technical world, lots of networks, lots of security stuff. I need to be able to explain that to somebody like the CEO in language that he or she can understand. So here's the homework I give to those newbies when they ask me that question. Take a really famous technical paper like the Lockheed Martin kill chain paper. It's about 20 pages. It's not that technical. Summarize it in a half a page so that your grandma can understand it. If you can do that, you have a career in cybersecurity. Because the first thing is you got to be able to explain what you're doing to your leadership team.
Understood. Last question for you, Rick. Great interview. Thanks for coming in, by the way.
Hey, thanks.
As organizations strive to reduce the probability of material impact over a specific time frame, we kind of alluded to that, how should they measure success and adjust their strategies in real time? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, everything that we do in our InfoSec program should be buying down risk for your organization. So and it changes day to day depending on the threat level, what's going on in the real world, and what's going on the inside of your network, where we're taking technology out, we're putting new technology in, we're bringing new teams in to do things. All of that contributes to calculating the risk that's going on in your organization. If you accept that, then you can absolutely do that on a day-to-day basis. And it doesn't have to be every minute, every second of the day, right? But it really does have to reflect as changes happen to your organization, that you can be able to reflect those numbers to leadership to make sure they are comfortable with their risk posture. Understood.
Hey, Rick, we're out of time. Thanks for joining us and sharing your groundbreaking approach to cybersecurity.
Thanks, man. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Well, that's going to wrap up today's episode. We extend our thanks to Mr. Rick Howard for sharing his invaluable expertise on revolutionizing cybersecurity through first principle thinking. His insights into mitigating threats, managing breaches, and employing innovative strategies like zero trust and risk forecasting have been truly enlightening. For more information about cybersecurity today and future episodes, please visit our show's website at www.cybersecuritytoday.org. Additionally, you can scan the QR code displayed at the bottom of your screen for quick and easy access to our show's website. Finally, we welcome your questions or comments via email at contact@cybersecuritytoday.org. Feel free to reach out to us. We're here to assist and engage with you. That does it for today. Thanks a lot for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at our next broadcast. Stay safe, stay informed. Have a great day.